Welcome, everybody. This is Allan Starling, and I have a word for you. As a matter of fact, quite a few words. Remarkable, exceptional, amazing, astonishing, astounding, marvelous, wonderful, sensational, stunning, incredible, unbelievable, miraculous, phenomenal, prodigious, spectacular, striking, outstanding, momentous, impressive, preeminent, memorable, unforgettable, unique, arresting, conspicuous, noteworthy, great, uncommon, surprising, uncanny, fantastic, terrific, tremendous, stupendous, awesome, out of this world, unreal, and wondrous. Will you say, what do all those words have to do with each other? Well, they're all synonyms for one word, the word extraordinary. And that's the word we're going to be looking at today. Extraordinary. Well, it doesn't take rocket science to look at this word and say, wait a minute, it's actually two separate words, extra and ordinary. Well, I like to turn them around a little bit and say it's really ordinary plus extra. And so I'm going to give you some examples of how this works, because God has a great deal for you and me. He says, I want you to do the ordinary, and I will do the extra. And between us, we'll do something extraordinary or extraordinary, depending how you want to pronounce it. Together, we will do something extraordinary. Well, you like an example? Okay. Billy Graham crusade. This man, who's this? We know who that is, Superman. Who's this? We know it's Batman. But do you know Battery Man? No, I'm sure you've never heard of him, and you probably won't hear of him again. But Battery Man was a man who worked for the Billy Graham crusade. And he came home one night, and his wife said to him, how did it go? He said, well, because of my expertise, 2,000 people came forward to accept the Lord. Wow, she said. What happened? Did Billy Graham ask you to preach in his place? No. What I did was I put the battery in his microphone. Oh, that all? What do you mean, that all? If I hadn't done that, nobody would have heard a word that he said, and nobody would have come forward. So I had a big hand in all those conversions. Well, that's right. God says, I want you to do the ordinary. So Battery Man did the ordinary, and Billy Graham did the ordinary. He said, oh, wait a minute, Billy Graham was a famous preacher and so forth. You know, he'd be the first person to tell you that he's just an ordinary person. And when you listen to his sermons, they weren't anything special. There's a lot of other pastors who could preach just as well. But somehow God decided to use Billy Graham, and he did the ordinary thing together with God, and then God did the extraordinary. And they did great things, and God used Billy Graham to do great things all around the world, and he preached to billions and billions of people, and he'd be the first to say, I'm just an ordinary person. Well, somebody says, what about the advertising people? If they hadn't advertised, nobody would have come. What about the counselors who went forward and talked to all these people and helped them in making their decisions? And what about the choir? They sang and prepared people for the message. And then what about George Beverly Shea? And Billy Graham used to say, I really never like to preach without George Beverly Shea singing before I preach. And George Beverly Shea would have told you, I'm just an ordinary person trusting the Lord and following Him. And all these people, God used them all together to do ordinary things so that God could do the extra on top of the ordinary. Well, you say, okay, that's very well, but is there anything in the Bible? Yes. Well, let's look at the wedding at Cana. Well, there's a servant who was working there at the wedding, and he came home, and his wife said, well, how did the wedding go? Oh, pretty good. Yeah, as a matter of fact, I did something quite spectacular. Well, what did you do? Well, I changed some water into wine. You did? Whoa, how did that happen? I was just doing my job, my ordinary job at the wedding, and then this lady came along, and her name was Mary. She was just an ordinary person. Well, now some people say, wait a minute, Mary was very special, highly regarded of God. Yes, it's true. But at this wedding, she was just doing an ordinary job. She was making sure that they had the wedding cake and the canopy and all the things that they had at the Jewish weddings. And then she came up to me, the servant says, and she said, you see that man over there? That's my son. His name is Jesus. Now, if he asked you to do anything, just do it. Okay. Yes, ma'am, that's my job. Okay. So Jesus comes along and he says, you see those water jugs over there? Just ordinary plain water jugs. Fill them up and take them to the MC. Well, excuse me, sir, but I think they're looking for wine, not water. Hey, just leave it to me, okay? You just do that part. We'll be okay. So I did that. I took it to the MC, and he had a little cup. He dipped into it and tasted, and he said, wow, this is the best stuff I've tasted. Well, I just did the ordinary thing, but Jesus did the extraordinary. What about the feeding of the 5,000? Well, that was another place where Jesus used ordinary people. We don't need to go into a lot of detail because you already know the story. He used an ordinary boy and his lunch. And maybe this was the only kid that brought lunch, or the only person, because otherwise I'm sure they would have brought a lot of other stuff together. But the boy had his lunch and he offered it to them. Ordinary. The disciples were ordinary people. Remember, the Jewish leaders said, oh, these are ignorant and unlearned people. They haven't even been to seminary. They were ordinary people, but Jesus used them. And then, of course, Jesus did the extra on top of the ordinary and performed a big miracle. All right, now we're coming to the real story that we want to follow today. The story about General Naaman, or if we like to just call him Naaman, in 2 Kings chapter 5. Well, first of all, here's a map of the area, and on the left we can see Israel. On the right we see Syria, and that's where this general came from. And then in the middle is the Golan Heights, and we hear quite a bit about it in the news from time to time. This was a segment that was captured by Israel in the 7-Day War years ago, And they have never made a peace treaty about it, so Israel is still claiming that. And Syria often lobs shells over from their side to the Israeli side. And the Golan Heights is kind of a little buffer there. And then up in the top is Lebanon. And we heard about a big explosion there recently in Beirut, which is a bit further north of this map. And Damascus of Syria is further north of this map as well, just to give you a little bit idea of where Naaman came from. So in Kings chapter 5, 2 Kings, we read, Naaman was commander of the army of the king of Aram, and he was a great man in the sight of his master and highly regarded. He was a valiant soldier, but, why is there always a but? Well, here's the but. What was the but? But he had leprosy. Now we should note that there's different kinds of leprosy, and the kind in Israel was a really bad kind, and people had to walk, if they had leprosy, they had to walk around with a little bell and call out, unclean, unclean. Maybe that's what we should be doing with the virus that we have right now. We should be going around keeping our social distance and saying, unclean, unclean. Anyway, the leprosy that he had apparently wasn't quite that bad, so he still had his job, but it wasn't very good either, and he would like to have got rid of it. It was very disfiguring. A captive young girl from Israel served Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, if only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy. All right. Naaman went to Aram, his king. He got a letter to the king of Israel. He took a big load of gifts, gold, silver, clothing, all kind of things, to give to the one that was going to cure him. The letter to the king of Israel, this is from the king of Aram, said, I present my servant Naaman. I want you to heal him of his leprosy. How'd you like to get a letter like that? When the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes in dismay and said, am I God that I can give life and take it away? Why is this man asking me to heal someone with leprosy? I can see that he's just trying to pick a fight with me. Oh, this king had less faith than that little slave girl did. When Elisha heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes in dismay, he sent this message to him. Why are you so upset? Send Naaman to me. So Naaman went with his horses and chariots and waited at the door of Elisha's house. But Elisha sent a message to him. Go and wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan River. Naaman became angry and stalked away. I thought he would certainly come out and meet me. I expected him to wave his hand over the leprosy and call on the name of his Lord, his God, and heal me. Aren't the rivers of Damascus better than any of the rivers of Israel? Why shouldn't I wash in them and be healed? So Naaman turned and went away in rage. When you see that word turned, it's talking about the word that we use, repent. Because when you repent, you are actually turning. You're saying to God, I was walking along this way, away from God. I had these ideas, and I believed this and that, and I acted this way. And now I'm changing my mind. I'm turning around and walking back toward God. We have a GPS on our car, and it has this cheeky little woman that's talking. We call her Bossy Bessie, because when we make a wrong turn, she will come on and say, "Make a legal U-turn." She wants us to turn around and go back the way we were coming so we can get on the right road. And that is what's called repent. I'm surprised she doesn't just say to us, "Repent and go back." His officers tried to reason with him. "Sir, if the prophet had told you to do something very difficult, wouldn't you have done it?" So Naaman went down to the Jordan River and dipped himself 7 times, and his skin became as healthy as the skin of a young child. Whoopee! Okay, a recap. What are the components in the story? Well, first we have the king of Syria, then the king of Israel, then silver and gold, a slave girl, the prophet Elisha, Naaman's officers, 2 rivers, and religion. Wow, all in one story. And the question is, can God use them? Well, God can use anyone, as we discovered when we were looking at Nehemiah. Well, God could use anyone, but the question is, will God use them? So let's have a look at the story again and see what God used. First of all, Naaman badly wanted a cure. He took the slave girl's advice. He made a big effort to get this cure, and he traveled all the way to Samaria, actually. But he went to the wrong person. Go and visit the prophet, he was told. He went first to his king and then to Israel's king. So he went to the wrong place. So the king of Syria, the king of Israel couldn't help him. But the slave girl could. She's the one that gave the advice for him to go. If only he'd listened properly. He thought he could buy a cure. He took gold, silver, and clothing with him. And Naaman had the wrong expectations. Elijah sent a message telling him what to do, but he expected to be treated like someone important, which he was in his own country. He was used to giving orders, not taking them. So he was offended, and he said, "I thought he would certainly come out and meet me." So we have the slave girl, we have silver and gold, which didn't help, but Elisha is going to help when the man finally decides to take his advice. And he chose the wrong method. He wanted a religious cure. He said, I expected him to wave his hand over the leprosy. He wanted a home cure. Our rivers are better than yours. Imagine somebody coming to Los Angeles and the prophet says, go and bathe in the Los Angeles River. If you've seen the Los Angeles River, it's just a big concrete basin with a little dribble of water in the bottom most of the year. And somebody would say, well, surely I could go to the Mississippi or some great river rather than there. He wanted the wrong cure. He thought he could earn the cure. No, he couldn't. So the religious action didn't help him. What next? Finally, his officers convinced him to do what the prophet had told him in the first place. So the officers are a big help to him, and God uses them to help Naaman decide what he's going to do. Finally, he obeyed and washed in the river Jordan. He repented. And as we talked about already, to repent is to make a U-turn. But this time, instead of turning away from God and the advice, he turned toward God and did what he was told. He acknowledged God as being the one and only God. So, he's in the Jordan River, and the Damascus rivers are left out of the equation. And God does the extra and brings a miracle, and he is cured of his leprosy. So, in closing, let's just look at those components again. Naaman wanted to use two kings. He wanted to use silver and gold. He wanted to use religion. He wanted to use the Damascus rivers. All these great things. But God used a slave girl, advice from his officers, a man of God, Elisha, and the Jordan River. Oh, so let's just look at a comparison of what God used and what Naaman used. Now, God could have used anything, but this is what Naaman wanted. Naaman wanted to be used by two kings. God said, no, a slave girl will help you. He wanted to use his silver and gold, but God said, no, I just want you to take some advice from your officers. He wanted to use religion. Instead, God said, we're going to use a man of God, not religion. And he wanted to go in his own home river, and God says, no, I want you to be in the Jordan. Not that the river was that important, it was obeying the order to go to that river. And so God used all these things to perform a miracle for him. And so now as we close, the question is, which column of things are you going to choose? You're going to use the things that Naaman wanted, or you're going to use the things that God used? Well, as for me and my house, we're going to choose the column on the left. And I hope that you do too. Thank you for watching, and God bless you, and have a great week.